Hello and welcome to our conversations with the candidates. My name is Wes Slade. I'll be your host today with candidate Hannah Bowen, candidate for Councilor at Large. I served on the City Council myself and as City Council President, and last year retired after serving as Beverly City Clerk for a number of years. Welcome, Hannah.
Welcome. Thank you. Good to be here.
Hannah, take a couple of minutes before we get to our questions to speak to the audience on why you're running and why do you want to do this?
You say that with a tone. I can hear it. I think a lot of people are thinking that this year. But yeah, I want to start with a thank you to you, Wes, for doing this, but also for your public service, and to the whole team here at BevCam who are putting together this whole series. So I'm really running because I love government and I love Beverly, and I've seen great public servants really lead this city through very interesting times and put us in a really good position, a really strong position, a really resilient position for what we're facing right now. And I feel like with my background in public service, my experience in policy work, and my experience helping people communicate with each other across divisions, I have a lot to offer at this time, and just really the energy and drive to serve the city effectively. So really my motivation in running for office is to work with all of you to make our city a wonderful place to live. It already is that in a lot of ways, and I see opportunities for us to build on that, to do even more. And so I'm ready to get to work and would appreciate your support and your ideas and your votes on November 2nd.
Terrific. Hannah, the candidate who receives the most votes for Councilor at Large, as you know, becomes the council president for the next 2 years. Beverly, our charter is unique in that respect. What's your view of that position? One of the five of you will become council president. How do you see the council president relating to the mayor, their administration, and the residents and businesses of Beverly?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I didn't really realize that was so unique until I got into the Charter Review Committee, was in the weeds of everything that's written in our current charter and how we might adapt it. And that committee is actually recommending that we look at that again and potentially switch to a system that's more like other cities around the Commonwealth, where the council would choose its own president. So we'll see how that goes when the council takes up those recommendations. But the role itself, I think, is a really nice balance to the mayor. It's, the person who is setting the agenda and the tone for how the council operates. And that person is next in line should the mayor leave their position, according to our charter. And that's because they are the person with the most votes across the city, that they have been elected at large as the mayor is. And so they represent the city as a whole in a similar kind of balanced way to the mayor. Now, obviously, the mayor and the city council have very different roles in our city government. And so I think it is important for the council president to be in close communication with the mayor and be collegial, but also to play that counterbalance role and that accountability role and asking for information where constituents don't feel like they're getting it from the mayor's office or department heads, and also to help propose ideas. I think you see at various times with different mayors and different councils that balance can be different. And I think that comes down in part to the council president, the role that they play in bringing new ideas to the agenda and bringing proposals for ordinances or conversations for the public to have. So I think in that role, I would like to have pretty open conversations and really actively use the public meetings of the city council to talk about some of the things happening in our community, things that are going well, just so we can reinforce that and build understanding, and challenges that people are seeing so that we can find some solutions.
Well, you're right. It in a large way, it depends almost entirely on the relationship between those two individuals. They've both run citywide. One has gotten more votes than the other. It could be either way. and you're right, Beverly is unique in that the way the council president is chosen, and also the fact that in the absence of the mayor, even for a short period of time, if the mayor's absent from the city for more than 3 days, I think it is, and then if for some reason the mayor, as happened in Boston, has to leave the position for whatever reason, then the council president becomes acting mayor.
Yep.
Moving on to a couple of the organizations and groups in Beverly. Beverly Main Streets, as you know, will have a new executive director with Jen Wallace's retirement. I'm interested in what role you see that person and that organization playing in the future of the city, and also the Greater Beverly Chamber of Commerce, which is a different organization with a larger geographical responsibility. And then also a couple of the institutions, Endicott College, Montserrat College of Art, the Cabot, the LARCOM, and North Shore Music Theater. These are all important and significant organizations in the city. I'm wondering, just briefly, how you see those different groups and organizations relating to the city as a whole and to city government.
Yeah, I think they're all strong partners and have been glad to see that they all, to some extent, already have a seat at the table. I think the relationship has been really strong between everyone you listed, but particularly Main Streets, the chamber, kind of the core cultural institutions in the city are involved. When I go to city meetings about almost any issue, there is a representative, and I think that's good and healthy, and that those open lines of communication, I think, really strengthen our work to attract businesses, to support businesses, to work with, the administration, at least, of the higher education institutions here. And I would add, we also have independent schools at the high school and lower level. So there are a lot of players who are not governed by our city government, but are affected by city policy, have inputs for city policy, and who represent large groups of stakeholders in our city, and so can kind of bubble up the opinions and ideas and needs and resources of their members, or of their constituencies in the case of the schools and the arts institutions. And so I think having all of those views in our city planning is critical. And I think that also needs to be, balanced with and as accessible to other groups who may not have some of the sort of savvy of how government works or how government has worked, so that they're also not the only people at the table. I think having that real mix of ideas is where we get the best solutions from. So, some of the recent public meetings where we've had ideas bubbling up, and some sound like complaints, some sound like suggestions, some are, more heated than others, but that's really where I think government can do great work in creating that space, listening hard, and really, picking out like, oh, if we put these 3 ideas that seemed totally unrelated from an arts institution and an art student at a college and a small business downtown, and we, create the space for them and make sure that there isn't a regulation in their way and make sure they have the support they need, we can have something really special. So I think, the government plays a role, both the council and, departments across the city, in facilitating those things. And I'm really happy to see strong leadership in those institutions who are willing to engage and ready to engage, on a day-to-day basis and when it comes to big decisions.
Well, you made a distinction that I hadn't thought of when I wrote those questions, that if you just consider what are, say, nonprofit organizations in the city, there are those large organizations that I mentioned, the Greater Beverly YMCA being another large one, but then you've got certainly Beverly Bootstraps, Harbor Light, Family Promise, Boy and Girl Scout troops, the religious organizations, the service clubs. There are lots of them, and you're right. Some are more actively or more normally or regularly included in decision making, and others may or may not be. But it's important to consider a lot of those voices. Hannah, development has been a big issue in Beverly for as long as I can think of. How much development, where and what type, I'm interested in your views on that, and specifically the general topic of development, but specifically with the waterfront. I think you could say that the waterfront's a work in progress, to be generous. What do you see happening on the waterfront and in the general idea of development going forward in the city?
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely a hot topic as I'm out knocking doors. That's one of the top things that comes up. And the city is split, I think. You know, there are people who are thrilled at the pace of development and it's what brought them to Beverly. There are people who feel like it's gone too far and their home has changed and they don't like it. And I mean, I think that's not just happening in Beverly. And so it's not just those feelings, and that tension is not just a result of the decisions that city leaders are making here. It's broader than that, but we are responsible for what's happening in Beverly, and we can chart the course that we want. So, you know, personally, the development of downtown really is part of what drew me back to Beverly when I moved back to the North Shore. That being able to live in a vibrant, walkable, you know, and relatively affordable space was key for me. And so when I was, you know, moving back from DC and looking at where am I going to settle long term, Beverly really had it all, and that is thanks to, you know, zoning changes that made some of that possible, investors who were willing to invest, and people who were willing to look at downtown and say, how do we make this really serve the people who already live here?
And you're originally from the North Shore, and you grew up in Swampscott, I think?
Yeah, in Swampscott.
Right,
yeah.
Okay. So Beverly was not an unknown
no, exactly.
quantity to you.
I lost many a track meet to Beverly in high school in a soccer game. But so, you know, so to me, like, some of that has been really, really positive. But I understand where people are coming from when they see big changes, and they're not changes that serve their needs. So these were changes that helped serve my needs, but not everybody's. So I think we do need to balance that. And at the recent public meeting about the Bass River development, key stretch of waterfront.
Well attended, from what I understand.
Yeah, actually maxed out the Zoom meeting. So there were people who wanted to attend who couldn't.
100 participants.
Yeah, so over 100 people across the city wanted to attend.
Wow.
Because I think it's such a hot topic, and in that area, you know, the dynamics are a little different. And so it came up on that.
I'm sorry, to be clear, that would be the area from behind Mass Electric along River Street all the way down to Stop and Shop.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
Yeah. And so the discussion there about how do we add a zoning overlay that allows different types of uses than currently could be there, add some residential, different types of commercial. In that discussion, I think we heard a lot about the need for open space to be built in, and some lessons from the development along Rantoul Street about what we thought was going to work for height worked pretty well, but started to push some buttons. And so, you know, how the design guidelines were written originally for Rantoul and what we ended up with, you know, now we've seen that, and now we know what it looks like, and now that is there. So what happens is on top of that, not starting from scratch. So I think
right nearby.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, so you already have that traffic that comes with new residents, and you already have the foot traffic that is keeping a lot of those businesses vibrant even during COVID. So I think we can build on that, but I think really do need to emphasize public access, open space, and that kind of, you know, variety of what goes in, because, you know, personally as a renter downtown, if my rent keeps getting nudged up because the entire downtown becomes high value rentals, you know, that's going to make it difficult for me to stay downtown. But if we start to incorporate, you know, townhouses and apartment units at different levels, and some that are, you know, condos for sale, and some that are rentals, and have that real mix so that we're not just adding one type of housing stock, I think that will serve us better. And I think one thing we've learned in the last year and a half is that having public spaces you can just go without having to purchase anything, without having to be a member of anything, without, you know, just be able to go and gather and, you know, enjoy the open space that we have is so like something we cannot put a price on.
31 parks, all the way from Lynch Park down to small neighborhood parks, some of which people don't even know
Right.
exist.
They're like tucked in around the corner somewhere.
Yeah, we'd be remiss today if we didn't talk about and I'm interested in your reaction to the recent incident of overt racism at the school committee meeting last month. Do you think that systemic racism is present in Beverly, and what do you think the council, or as a counselor, you can do about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's present everywhere in our country, unfortunately. And I think we need to talk about that and need to recognize that. And I think we need to recognize that the reason you use the term systemic racism is because it is a system-wide problem, and it's a combination of people's individual choices and behavior and knock-on effects from that they don't see as conscious choices, but just have built up over time. And people build institutions, we make choices that work for us and for the people around us and the people who look like us. And that's in some ways very natural, and in other ways really, really harmful when we, are doing that to the exclusion of our whole community. So, I think the city council has plenty they can do on inclusion, on equity work, on pushing for diversity in hiring, in procurement, and just voices at each table, in each board and commission, and constantly asking those questions.
Appointments and
Yeah, and I think appointments in particular, the council reviews and can vote up or down.
Yes.
And I think it's perfectly valid to, if all of the candidates for a particular board fit the same profile, and that's race, but it's also age, it's renters and buyers, it's, different parts of town, it's different education levels. If everyone fits exactly the same profile, some of them should not be approved, right? Like, we should be looking for going back to the table and saying, who are we not inviting? Who are we not making these kinds of positions accessible to? What are we missing? And not because, the 4 people that might be proposed to have all the same qualifications are bad. They might all be well qualified, but they're not the only ones who are qualified.
Yeah.
So I think there are a lot of, across the city, small and big things that we can do to just, be as representative and inclusive of our whole community as it is today and as it will become as we can.
I didn't think of that when I wrote the next question, but I wanted to ask you about communication and city government's effectiveness at communicating with residents. What steps do you think that can be taken to improve communication, if any, not just related to the systemic racism question, but the way that city government interacts with residents and businesses, and the way those constituents deal with city government?
Yeah, so I think right now, I think the default is if you ask a question, you'll get an answer. If you've asked the right person in the right way, you'll get an answer. The information is there.
And knew where to go to ask
exactly.
it, or to whom.
Yeah. And I think I give our current city officials a lot of credit for fielding constituent calls and answering a lot of questions, but we're not set up to proactively get information out all that well. I think city government has started using social media tools more effectively to let people know kind of where they are. Hey, you're already scrolling through this platform or that platform, you're going to see something about a city meeting. But, going out to, so a lot of the groups that you mentioned earlier are partners in the city, city officials going to their meetings, not just inviting people into city meetings is key. And I think really helping break down the issues for people, because one of the nice things, I think, about, see what it was like in your experience, but one of the nice things about being in the city council or on a board or commission or in city hall is you get to see the full picture of what's happening. You get all the background documents, you get the spreadsheets to dig through, you get, you're seeing things in real time, and you can ask those questions and figure out what is really important, what looks like it's nothing but actually is a big thing. Over in Peabody, the power plant that has become controversial is one of those things that sort of slipped under the radar because it wasn't flagged for people, and not everyone knows to look for XYZ type of permit with this kind of name, and we can't be expected to, right? People are busy. We're all working on lots of different things, but it is a role for the city council in particular, I think even more so than City Hall, to be those translators and help communicate out, hey, I know there's a lot going on, but this one you should pay attention to, or this one I really need your feedback on. And for me, I work in a nonprofit here in Beverly, so I don't always know what's happening in the for-profit business world. So I know I need to go to the Chamber of Commerce or Main Streets and ask those questions, because it might not be obvious to me. I mean, obviously I'm a consumer in the city, but there are things that I will probably miss if I don't ask. And I think in public service, we have to go in with that attitude of, I don't know everything, but I know hopefully who to ask. And I think that list of who to ask should be citywide, should be as long and diverse as possible, because that's where we're going to get the best ideas.
Where to go to get the information.
Yeah.
Hannah, we are obviously a coastal community, and so climate change may affect us greatly in the long run or even near term.
Yeah.
I wonder what your thoughts are on what the city should be doing to address that, and specifically, Beverly's completed many capital projects, from all the schools to the new police station. What should be the next major project, and then how, if at all, should that relate to whatever the city should be doing to address being a coastal community and climate change?
Yeah, well, I think this gets back a little bit to your waterfront question, because any new development has to factor in flood risks and how any new development would potentially raise risks for others around. And I think there is space for some city work, hopefully in partnership with any developers that are working in the Bass River area or other parts of the waterfront, to really build up resilient space. So I know there's work underway at Aubert Park, an initial study there to look at erosion and what's happening and how we can kind of shore that up.
And
the pumping station.
I was going to say the pump station at the end of Water Street there.
Yeah, so our sewerage that goes out to sea, you don't want that to, flood or be damaged by stormwater. So, I think there are some major projects already getting started. I think really looking at even things like the COVID relief funds, how we deploy those should also have a climate resilience lens. There are already neighborhoods in the city facing flooding that they haven't seen, or to degrees they haven't seen. And if they are in places that qualify for that assistance, let's think about, meeting multiple targets at one time, because I think everything that we build now, and it was nice to see the police station incorporate things like being raised to avoid flooding and being carbon neutral or moving in that direction.
Geothermal, solar canopy.
Yeah.
I don't want to run out of time and give you some time for a closing statement, but a couple of quick things. Beverly's going to celebrate 400 years since its settlement, along with Salem in 1626, only 5 years from now. Any quick ideas about how the city should prepare for that?
Yeah, well, I think, we're lucky to have Historic Beverly as a resource in the community, and I've been really pleased to see what they're doing about really kind of reckoning with our full history, its positives, its negatives, what we can learn. And, colonization is something, again, is why we're here today as an incorporated
for them,
city.
Clearly.
Yeah, but it's also at the expense of communities that were here. So I think having that conversation in a way that really celebrates what we love about Beverly today and recognizes where we came from is going to be, I think, fun. I think there's also good ways to celebrate and bring people out into the city, build on the traditions we already have around homecoming and all the main streets events.
We've got some time to plan, too.
We do, and maybe in partnership with Salem.
Counselor at large and ward councilors, similar but different. You chose to run for council at large beyond any political considerations. How do you see the roles being different?
Yeah, so I see the ward councilors as really closest to their neighborhood of constituents. And so they're the first line of defense for potholes and challenges within the neighborhood. And at-large counselors are also there for that, working with the ward counselors, but also there to sort of hear from across the city and balance out a little bit. So, when we need to prioritize across the city, having several people that are accountable to the whole city, not just to their neighborhood, helps with that prioritization, I think, and with the kind of setting the agenda for the council as a whole.
And then finally, before we wrap up, the council, as you know, elects the city clerk and that to run that operation, and then chooses a budget management analyst, currently Jerry Perry.
Yeah.
How do you see those two roles supporting the council, and how would you see to use them as a counselor?
Yeah, I think they're critical roles. And I was, I again learned a lot through the charter review process about why those are there. And there was a whole discussion as well about whether the council also needs a legal analyst, not so much a lawyer like the city solicitor in that role, but an analyst to sort of help understand, okay, if we write an ordinance like this, what does that actually mean? What language do we need? The same way that Jerry Perry is able to break down, okay, if we question this number, what's behind it? Help me understand where this is coming from. And it's about breaking down what can be an information asymmetry between the mayor and department heads and the council.
Independent legal advice along with independent financial advice.
Yeah.
And the clerk?
Well, so I think it's also key that the clerk is there to, the very important job of running our elections, but also running a lot of the sort of public communication and making sure that open meetings are, truly open and is kind of that hub for keeping the council on task. They're part-time jobs, and so having that staff that's there, that's fielding questions from the community, that's helping get all the materials pulled together that counselors need, and that's working really closely with them to get all the information that the public needs and that the council needs to make decisions. Both the people in those roles and the roles themselves, I think, are really critical to helping the council function well and serve the city well.
Well, we're at that point where I want to make sure that we give you some time a couple of minutes to do a closing statement. I want to thank you for coming today, and this is your opportunity to speak to your potential constituents and encourage people to show up to vote.
Great. Thank you again. And really, these issues that we've been talking about are the same ones I've been talking to all of you about, out knocking doors and at events all summer and over the last several years, because I think they're the key challenges and the key opportunities that we face as a city. And the thing that I want to pick up on the most, I think, to close is really this issue of communication. Because to me, that's at the heart of how I feel about public service, what I've learned in public service to date, and why I'm running for city council. It's really to open those lines of communication even further, to listen well. And I think, our city is well managed. I love it here. I think we live in a great place with a lot of great things going on. But I've learned as a Peace Corps volunteer, working in policy, now working in community mediation, that having the right technical solution and the right management is not enough. Government is just not like that. It's not like running a business. And if you don't also have, buy-in, and if people don't understand how a decision was made, and if people haven't contributed to that decision and shared their ideas, they're not going to get behind it in the same way. So it can be the perfect solution, but it's not going to be perfect governance. And so I'm really approaching this campaign and this role in the way that, I approach my nonprofit work and public service in general, which is to say I certainly have ideas, but they're not the only ideas, and I want to hear yours. I want to build solutions together. And where we find those great solutions, want to make sure that we have the buy-in and we know what the downsides are, and that we're able to move forward together with trust and with open communication. So with that, I hope that you'll show up with your ideas and your votes in November.
Well, thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming, and good luck with the rest of the campaign. You've been listening to Conversations with the Candidates. Hannah Bowen, candidate for Counselor at Large, thank you for watching. There'll be information up on the screen on the deadlines and the information related to the election. Thank you for listening.